In the late 1800s, very little was known about Africa, and the British aristocracy used to fund expeditions to places like the Serengeti and just to learn more. And they assembled a team of zoologists and biologists and botanists and to take to Africa. Now, they always took a sketch artist because those days they didn't have movie cameras. They had the old box cameras that were cumbersome and they couldn't really develop anything in the field, so artists shoot sketch. Now, at one particular point, these biologists, this team was studying a herd of zebra. Now, the question that perplexed them was, why has the zebra got stripes? Because it provided no camouflage at all against the African bush, because they all live on the plains, so they'd stick out a mile. Anyway, the sketch artist was drawing a zebra, and he'd look down, and then he'd look back up, and he couldn't remember which zebra he was actually sketching. And he mentioned this to the team at one of their meetings, and they developed a hypothesis. Now, the hypothesis was that the zebra stripe weren't to camouflage it from its environment, they were to camouflage it within the herd. Now, this is very important because the lions attack and eat zebras. And so, as far as the individuals go, they wanted to be camouflaged. So, now, this served them very well. But to prove their hypothesis, they rounded up a herd of zebra and caught one. Now, on the flank of the zebra, they painted a red stripe. They'd been observing lions, observing the herd of zebra. And they'd sit there watching them for hours, and the question was, why didn't they attack? And it's to do with that camouflage against the herd. They couldn't single an individual out. So when they painted the red stripe on the flank, they then let it go back to the herd. Well, within an hour, it was caught and eaten by the lions. Now, the point there is that the minute they got something to focus on, they could attack. Now, where does this fit in with Adani? Now, Adani is the zebra with the red stripe. Since the Adani controversy erupted, 4 coal mines have opened in Queensland, and there's a giant mine wants to open right next door to Adani, and it's called the China Stone Mine. Now, you've never heard of that, neither had I. But the focus is on Adani. Now, I want to just have a look. I wanted to research it a bit more because I was curious about it. So I tried to look for a comparison in Queensland as far as size goes, and I found one at Blair Athol. The Blair Athol mine has been mining coal for 70 years. It produces about the same, in its last few years, it's producing the same as Adani's forecast, around that 10 million tonne a year. Now, the China Stone Mine next door is going, by their own reckoning, they want to produce 40 million tonnes a year. Now, that's 4 times what Adani are producing, or want to produce, but you've never heard of it. It's well underway. So, now the Blair Athol mine, for 70 years, produced jobs for mine workers, rail workers, port workers, contractors, construction people, thousands and thousands of people over 70 years. So I thought, why single out Adani? And I'm still working my way through that. But it's, there's more to it. So I'm looking for the bad actor. Who is actually behind this? Now, it's easy to blame the Greens, but it's not the Greens, in my opinion. And the reason is the Greens are accountable. They come up with a whole heap of loony policies. 3 years they've got to face the people. If people don't like their policies, they're out. So the Greens are doing what the Greens want to do, and that includes opposition to Adani, and the Australian people have a chance to make a judgment about that. Behind that, the bad actor appears to be the Australian Conservation Foundation. Now, it's accountable to nobody. It's creating the fuss. It's the guy with the paintbrush. The Greens are the lions in this analogy. So now I've looked at the ACF website. Now, where does their opposition come from? So it started off about birds and palm trees and endangered species. And you look at the tiny little footprint of Adani Mine on a slice of central Queensland, it's nothing. And at the time, they'd have us believe that within that little circle, there are all these endangered birds and endangered palm trees. Eventually, they figured out, this doesn't make a lot of sense. People aren't going to buy this, and we didn't. So then they changed to just, we're sick of fighting arguments about it, because they wanted to argue about water. Well, the amount of water that Adani want to use sounds like billions of litres, but it's a drop in the ocean compared to what's available out there. And I've been there. I've been to Alpha, I've been to Jericho. I know those places. They don't, but I've been there. And it's really godforsaken country, for goodness sake. So then the water thing didn't work. So what they did, they decided, if we blame it all on climate change, then who's going to argue with us? Because if you argue about climate change and they can then paint you with this red paint as a climate denier, and from that point on, anything you say is worth nothing. Now, I'm not a climate denier, but I'm not an alarmist either. And I just say that because if we go back a few years when The Inconvenient Truth with Al Gore came out, and around that time, a few years ago, there should have been no more ice at the Arctic, half the Pacific Islands were going to be underwater, and none of that happened. And in fact, to the consternation of the ACF, the Conservation Foundation, the Arctic ice is growing. Now, that's a bit of I'm not sure how they're going to spin that. But what I believe in anthropological climate change, but I also believe in the science and technology. I mean, there are big rewards here for the company that can fix this, that can remove the CO2 from the air and prevent climate change. There's no immediate problem. We've already seen that. So the problem, there is a problem and it needs to be fixed going forward. But I've every faith in our scientists and governments to actually instigate that change without the expense of thousands and thousands of families and jobs and secure work for mine workers, rail workers, port workers. I don't think I'm prepared to believe that and let these other people have decent jobs and a decent life. Now, the big surprise to me is the Labor Party. Now, that is their constituency. You think about it. Construction workers, mine workers, railway workers, port workers, they're the people they represent. Now, what are they saying? They're prepared to throw them all under the bus for the sake of green preferences. Don't forget, I'm not blaming the Greens at all. They're accountable. But are Labor going to do that? Why aren't the unions kicking up more of a stink? The unions could end this tomorrow. But I don't know. They've got to answer to their people and themselves, because their officials can be voted out as well in a democracy. So my concern is that Adani is being unfairly targeted. They're claiming the global warming thing, so the other 4 mines that have opened and the China Stone project, they're not going to contribute to global warming? Where's your concern about that? There isn't any. And what I believe is happening, you get groups like the Australian Conservation Foundation, and basically they start off idealistic. And yes, let's save the planet, let's do this, let's do that. But then they morph into an animal that is more about survival and more about their own growth and their own position in the political landscape. Now, all this is private money that they're being funded from based on all these harebrained ideas like Adani are bad and everyone else is all right. So I call out the Australian Conservation Foundation as the body behind this. I don't believe that they're altruistic at all. They've got an agenda, and they're allowed to have an agenda, but they're not accountable. Greens and Labor should not follow their lead. They're being actually funded and led by people who aren't elected. So that's my take on Adani. I think they've been treated disgracefully. I hope common sense prevails and the Adani mine gets the go-ahead. And that's my 2 bobs worth. So thank you very much.